guys, welcome to another edition of Nerdy in Many Ways. I'm Dawson Weidrich, and today is going to be a movie review. And the last movie review I did was of Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeves. And so I'm kind of sticking with that same genre as far as fantasy and drama is concerned, but I'm going to a more modern movie, which is 2006's Stranger Than Fiction starring Will Ferrell. Now, before I get too far into it, I'm going to make sure you guys know that there's going to be a lot of spoilers in this video. I'm going to be talking about major plot points, character development, lines from the movie overall, and again, if you haven't seen the movie,
get out of here!
Watch the movie, then come back, or if you have seen it or don't care about spoilers, go ahead and stay on, but again, be warned for spoilers. And so this movie has a fantastic cast with Harold Crick as the main protagonist, which is played by Will Ferrell, who I think is the most serious in this movie than I think he's ever been in his entire life. And then you also have Karen Eiffel, who is played by Emma Thompson, who you might remember from the new Men in Black movies. Anna Pascal, who is played by Maggie Gyllenhaal, who is Rachel Dawes from The Dark Knight. Rachel! And then you also have Professor Hilbert, which is Dustin Hoffman, who's always fantastic and great. And so basically the story, again, surrounds the main character, Harold Crick. Harold Crick is a IRS worker. He's basically a tax man, right? He goes out and audits people and figures out how much people owe and stuff like that. He's basically the most hated person alive. And he's also very OCD, very quiet, very much a loner. Lives by himself, walks home and to work alone, I guess to the bus stop to work alone, does everything alone, and is just a very quiet personality. Very smart, but a very quiet guy who really hasn't lived, really. He's just kind of lived to work, which is kind of sad, and of course that changes here later in the story. And Karen Eiffel is an award-winning author of many different tragedies, and this is of course played by Emma Thompson. And again, if you don't know exactly what a tragedy definition is, it's basically a sad story about a character that ends up having a untimely demise. Or at least that's a generic version of a tragedy, right? And so she writes these things, and so our main characters in her books die. And that's going to be important later on. And Anna Pascal is played by Maggie Gyllenhaal. Anna Pascal is a baker who Harold Crick is sent to audit one day. And Anna Pascal is very much not for that. She deliberately doesn't pay taxes because she just doesn't feel like it's handled well. And she's just like that. And Professor Hilbert, played by Dustin Hoffman again, comes on later in the story, but he's a professor of literature. And again, that'll be important here in a little bit. So Harold Crick, again, works for the IRS, but throughout his normal, mundane life, he starts to hear this voice narrating things in his head. And this is, of course, the voice of Karen Eiffel, voiced by Emma Thompson. And he starts to kind of freak out, trying to figure out if he's crazy or not. But instead of this voice telling him what to do, it's narrating things he's already doing. And so it weirds him out, and so he goes to see some specialists, and they tell him that he's probably got schizophrenia. And one of them that tells him he's got schizophrenia is the real-life Edna Mode, Linda Hunt. And so he's like, well, it's not schizophrenia, so who else can I talk to? And she's just like, well, I'd suggest going to see somebody that knows about literature, because he mentioned it's a narrating voice and not a commanding voice. And so that's what leads Harold Crick to Professor Hilbert, played by Dustin Hoffman. And Professor Hilbert, of course, doesn't really treat this like anything special at first because, I mean, a person hearing voices, that's automatically duped as crazy, right? And you wouldn't really even think of anything else going on or even anything close to fantasy. And so Harold Crick tries to get his help, and he talks to him and basically tries to figure out if his story that is being narrated is a tragedy or a comedy. And so he tries to figure this out by trying to woo Anna Pascal, the baker, who again hates his guts. And the only thing it took for Harold Crick to actually get her attention, to get her love and affection, was to say this.
I know that I've been odd, and I want you.
What?
Of course, that led to this. Because that's reasonable. That works all the time, especially in 2019. Anyway, so that relationship starts to flourish. And so Harold Crick at this point is convinced that this is a comedy. And so Dustin Hoffman starts to list off these different authors that could possibly be writing his story. And one day when Will Ferrell, or Harold Crick, comes to Professor Hilbert's office, he hears a voice on the TV. And it's on an author, I guess, news station or whatever. And Karen Eiffel is on the television talking about her new book. And so Harold Crick automatically recognizes his voice. He looks at the TV just absolutely mystified and says, that's her. That's the voice. And then Professor Hilbert's like, no, that can't be it. That can't be it. Because, of course, it's not on his list. And then he says, no, I'm serious. That is the voice. And what gets me is that Professor Hilbert is upset because, first off, it's not on his list, which kind of shows you what kind of an arrogant prick this character ends up being. And then also, this is Karen Eiffel, as I mentioned, who writes tragedies and nothing else. And so all of our main characters die. And in fact, this is even more evident when earlier on in the movie, Harold Crick hears the voice saying, "Little did he know this small and insignificant thing would lead to his imminent death," or something along those lines. And of course, he freaks out about this. And so this starts to make sense as to what Harold Crick's story is. So, of course, Harold Crick is distraught because he knows that the author of his story, or I guess the mental author of this story, is one who writes tragedies and kills people. And all throughout this time, Karen Eiffel is trying to figure out a way to kill Harold Crick, her main character in her book, who she has no idea is alive. And she's running to a little bit of writer's block. And so you see a couple of interesting scenes where Karen Eiffel kind of puts herself in the shoes of someone who is dying in different ways. And she's, of course, being helped out by Queen Latifah's character, who is basically a publishing firm's agent sent out to help her, right? And so while Karen Eiffel is having this dilemma of how to kill Harold Crick is out trying to live his life and figure out things. He eventually has his apartment destroyed for no apparent reason, which he should get a lot of money for with insurance. But, I mean, it's a very interesting thing that's going on here. But once Karen Eiffel figures out how to kill Harold Crick, she writes down on a notepad, which isn't official because it's not typed yet, which is a weird rule for this. I don't even know why, but it never really is explained, and that's deliberate. But anyway, after she finally figures out how to kill Harold Crick finds a way to contact Karen Eiffel. And so he talks to her on the phone, and of course she freaks out because no one else is supposed to know about the name Harold Crick. And it's exactly how she imagines his voice to be. And eventually she ends up inviting him over to her place just to kind of meet him. And he looks exactly as she imagined, of course, because she created the character. And she flips out. Absolutely goes bonkers and is just absolutely mortified because she realizes she's written so many books about people that have died untimely deaths and that were good people. She even mentioned a school teacher that she killed a day before summer vacation. And so she starts to question, were all those people real people? Did I kill all those people in such horrible ways, such nice people? Which is an interesting concept. I'm going to kind of go into that real quick. This is never really explained, but this raises some questions, this whole Karen Eiffel killing people thing. So the question is, was Harold Crick a person to begin with, but then Karen Eiffel just started conveniently writing about it and it just became part of her story? Or did when Karen Eiffel started to write about him, he just morphed into existence and everybody knew him and he just had a career and everything just kind of worked out that way? Because if so, that means that she created and killed these people just within a couple of months or weeks, depending on how long the books are. And so it's kind of messed up. And again, you don't really figure out why, because again, she would have to create these people, or they would have to be somehow like drawn into this little mystical thing of her typing and then them dying. It's a really weird thing that's not explained, but again, it's deliberate and it's not extremely important, but it's something that kind of bugs me now that I think about it. Harold Crick hears that the book is finished, and the book, Karen Eiffel gives it to Professor Hilbert because she figures out that that's who has been helping Harold Crick. And Professor Hilbert reads it, and he says it's a masterpiece. He tells Harold Crick that he has to die. For the sake of the book, a man has to die. I find that to be quite morbid and quite disturbing for a character to admit that. Like, I get that people want a poetic death, but at the same time, Professor Hilbert, you're putting a man's life underneath the value of a book. A book. And so that's why I've had a hard time with Dustin Hoffman's character this time around watching it. I thought it was a quirky, fun character when I first watched it. But watching it now, he's really messed up. And again, it's just disturbing how he doesn't value Harold Crick's life above a tragedy written on paper. And so that's my rant on that. I just think that's kind of interesting. But eventually Harold Crick reads the transcript as well, and he agrees. He agrees that he has to die. He agrees that it's an amazing book, and he says you should publish it. And he's totally fine with facing his own death, knowing exactly how it's going to happen, and being okay with it. Even though he finally has started to live his life, he finally started to learn to play guitar, he finally had a relationship with a woman that he absolutely loved, and now he's ready to face his death, which is really, really brave of him, but just, man, so sad. Very, very sad. So, of course, Harold Crick goes on his more regular day routine, and he sees the situation play out before him, and he does exactly what he's supposed to do. He saves a little boy on a bike from being hit by a bus, and in turn is hit by the bus, and the words are typed on paper, the man was dead. And Karen Eiffel, of course, is distraught because she realizes she just killed a man. But there's a silver lining here. Harold Crick is not dead. Karen Eiffel changed her mind. And so Harold Crick wakes up in the hospital with multiple injuries, several broken bones, and the wristwatch, which looked to be a big deal at the beginning of the movie, but really wasn't when you actually think about it, ended up saving his life by having a piece lodged inside his arm which stopped the bleeding. And so they made this small little plot device that was supposed to be big in the end, but it was just like, I don't know. It was kind of interesting. And Karen Eiffel shows the finished product, the changed product, to Professor Hilbert. And Professor Hilbert says, well, it's not nearly as good at all. You really shouldn't have changed it. But Karen Eiffel said, well, you know, I'm good with just okay. I'm good with just having an okay book. And she kind of explains how Harold Crick's the type of guy who knew his death was coming and how it was going to come and when it would happen. And he faced his own death willingly. And she said, isn't that the kind of guy you'd like to keep alive? Which I feel teaches a very important lesson nowadays, is that a lot of people tend to sacrifice what is good for what is popular and what is liked. In Karen Eiffel's case, the popular or liked thing would have been to publish the book as a tragedy and have Harold Crick die. Right? That'd be the popular and likable thing to do. But the right thing would be to keep a man who was so brave and faced his death so willingly alive. And she chose the good in that. And I think that just shows us that when we're faced with things that are either popular and liked or what is good, when they're up against each other, you gotta pick the good. I mean, again, it's not gonna get you liked, it's not gonna get you popular, but it's the right thing to do. And so I just think it's a very interesting story that I don't know if the director intentionally meant to tell, but I thought was very interesting. And so that's my review of Stranger Than Fiction with Will Ferrell. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I absolutely love this movie overall. Again, very interesting things going on here that I feel like aren't really explored. But again, great overall. Make sure to like and comment and subscribe as well. Make sure to let me know what you thought of the movie if you've seen it. And again, the goal is 200 subscribers. Make sure to help out and get there. Every little like and every little subscription helps. And I'll see you guys next time.